People from the community, teachers, some college students, and very pleased that this nice cross-section of the Hastings community, in fact, we scheduled this very special program in the evening just so we could get this kind of special group who have an interest in creative writing and poetry. So a special thank you to all of you who took time out from a busy schedule and your homework, tore yourself away from that homework, to come here for what will be a very special, very entertaining, very meaningful program. I want you to know that, as to the best of my knowledge, and those who've been here longer than I have, this is the first time we've presented a program here at the junior high of this nature. A program emphasizing the humanities, particularly creative writing. I'd like to thank a few people for helping to make this possible. First of all, the Nebraska Committee for the Humanities, who has made substantial money available to help us invite poets, writers, to our outdoor classroom program on the Platte River, which took place in early September and or late September and early October, both last year and this year. And then also to bring the three fine Nebraska writers here tonight to read for you, and then later on to read and listen to your poetry. I'd like to thank Dr. Ewing, the principal of the junior high school, for encouraging us. Is Dr. Ewing here? He may be helping. There he is, okay. And the school board and the administration has been very supportive, and we appreciate that. We simply couldn't do something like this without their help and support and encouragement. I see Dr. Merman here, who has helped us to set this up. Jane Rodas, our librarian at the junior high, has helped with the sound and has made a wonderful display called the Walk Through Time that you'll see as you go into the library for the second part of the program. Be sure to notice that. And Rod Zock, who is a student teacher suffering through the student teaching experience with me, who has done a great deal of just plain hard work to put this together. But of course, especially the parents and then the students. We wouldn't have this program if it weren't for the students, and we wouldn't have all this writing that we're going to be talking about this evening without them. So thank you. Lots of students have brought cookies and helped move tables. It's been a team effort. This is a spin-off of the Walk Through Time Poetry on the Platte project that takes place over on the Platte River. I have in my hands this stack of poetry. I want you to know, parents and patrons, that your 7th graders and last year's 8th graders are writing and doing some good writing. This started out as about 500 poems. It's been narrowed down a bit to 400, and it'll be narrowed down some more by maybe taking the best 1 or 2 from each of the students so that we get it to about 200, and it will be published in a book called Poetry on the Platte. This was printed last fall. There are a few copies left that those of you who have special interest and don't have one may pick up in the library, along with some other poems that are there for you. Second part of the program is when the students will sit down in the library in the circles with our writers who we're about to introduce, and if they're nervy enough, brave enough, and I think we have some, they're going to get their turn to read. And so we have 3 circles in there of about 12 or 15. If those fill up, parents, you might want to pull up a chair and sort of sit on the outside if you like, or perhaps you'd rather just look at the pictures, drink some coffee, look at the automatic advanced slideshow, and just have a good time. I think it's going to be a great time, and let's get on with it. Each of the writers is going to read what they've chosen. They know that it's going to be a very mixed and special group. I'm anxious to hear what they're going to read. We have Dwight Marsh, who's an English professor at Hastings College and editor of the Nebraska or Midwestern literary magazine, featuring mainly, I think, poetry, called Plain Songs. I believe he has some copies with him that he'll have in the library. And Daryl Lloyd, English professor at Hastings College, and started his teaching career, I think, at Hastings High School, and is the head of the Hastings College English department. And Bill Kloefkorn, who is back on the Poetry on the Platte project for the second year. And Bill is from Nebraska Wesleyan in Lincoln and is the Nebraska Poet Laureate and has published a number of books of poetry. So let's begin by welcoming Dwight Marsh. Dwight?
Probably not any of you have really seen a bona fide copy of Plain Songs, so I brought one here, and it looks like this. This is its fall copy here. Plain Songs is a magazine which has grown out of the Nebraska Writing Project, a teacher re-education writing teacher re-education project run out of the University of Nebraska, and I'm proud to be associated with it. I'm a graduate of that program, and this is a magazine which is a spin-off that to make a market for local Nebraskan writers, and we like to pride ourselves on being accessible to beginning writers, to people trying it out for the first time. We also like to pride ourselves on not taking 2 or 3 years to get a magazine into print, but rather doing it in half a year or so. And it's now gone through 15 issues, and for a poetry magazine that is not subsidized, that is a miracle. And I'm proud to have a part in it. The kind of poetry I write likes to start in something very concrete and very specific. And the message I try to teach students, in which I kind of made the theme of my walk-through time with the students on our program, was writing from the senses, that is, using one's senses to perceive the world and converting those senses, those words, into physical images. And I'd like to read one of the students' responses, which took I think took its initiation from that particular emphasis which I gave, which was to write from sight, taste, hearing, sound, smell, all the 5 senses. And a student named Mary Honer wrote this. Is Mary Honer here this evening? Very good. I'd like to read this because I hear echoes of the kind of thing that I was trying to drive home with the students. And it's entitled Senses. Listen, do you hear a cricket or a bird? Look, can you see a cottonwood leaf glimmering in the wind? Smell, can you smell the freshly cut hay? Taste, can you taste the delicious cornbread? Touch, can you feel the care put into a bird's nest? Use your senses and the world comes alive. And, I appreciate that, Mary, very much, and I enjoy being able to read it to this group. What I'm going to read of my own tonight comes from a book I'm trying to put together and have been trying to put together for 15 years, I guess, but because it's on a rather limited theme, and to find a poem that really fits this theme, I have to go looking off and on. I got a title for the book. It's called Uttering the Word. And it takes its initiation, it's around a religious theme, and it takes its initiation from this particular passage from John. When all things began, the Word already was. The Word dwelt with God, and what God was, the Word was. The Word then was with God at the beginning, and through him all things came to be. No single thing was created without him. All that came to be was alive with his life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines on in the dark, and the darkness has never mastered it. And that ties in very well, I think, with my emphasis upon concreteness, upon senses. I see my poetry then as an attempt for me to reconcile the language of spirituality and of theology with the visible, concrete, physical world, the objective world in which I live. And I won't read these in any particular order because I haven't set the order for the book yet, but these are all poems that will eventually be tied around that theme and be put into a book. I'll start with 2 or 3 which I read at the campfire. So if some of the children who were at the camp out when I was, this may sound familiar, but I think they're worth rehearing. First one's called Walking Tour, and it takes its initiation from the idea that life is a journey and we're all on it. Life is a pilgrimage, and I try to bring that down to very modern imagery, and it works like this. Walking Tour. I would make camp and rest among these trees. I have hiked far and borne this burden of light provisions and camping tools, and now the light is fading. But I have felt the presence of odious, nefarious vermin that disturb me, that scurry through underbrush trails which I, too big-footed, booted, try to follow, lifting the low scrub vegetation to see where the pathway turns, divides. I hear the skitter of their claws among dead leaves and needles, rushes and starts of shadow, too quick, too done for the focus of my eye in the dimming evening woods. I smell the rank, organic, unsown forest mold, the wet and musty rush of mouse nest dung. I fear to camp, to unroll this sleeping bag, to stretch myself among this sparse, anemic foliage, to lie down and sleep with reptiles, mice, and spiders. I fear the nightmares that will come for years, haunted by the crawl and itch of mites. That's kind of how I feel about camping out at Camp Augustine, as a matter of fact. But that's only half of my feeling, because here's a poem that's a kind of match to it, entitled More Than Halfway. You know, you get more than halfway, you begin to mellow out a bit. Anyway, here it goes. In the forest I came upon a pool after tangled trails and traces of paths that made me sweat and stumble, that filled and stirred itself clean and spring-fed, wavered on its surface, overflowed and fed a narrow gurgling stream. The shards of sunlight fell through shade upon the surface, and pieces of sky through leaves quivered on the water when I drank on my knees from my leaky fingers, drank deep on all fours, face to face with my recognizable reflection. My boots, my knapsack, clothing laid aside, I entered the cool waters, plunged beneath, stroked and rose, floated on my back, and watched the forest leaves hang clean, tumescent and fully green from the pool's sustaining waters. Heard the warble and chitter of birds in the branches, the nearby trickle of water in the stream. Saw a summer berry in a passing yellow bill, and the flutter and blur of wings. Here's a poem I call Terra Infirma. It goes very large and abstract and takes a rather large view of the universe. In my more omnipotent moments, maybe I can actually see these things go on. It's a Latin phrase meaning unfirm ground. We've often heard of sailors giving thanks when they get to terra firma. This one takes a little different slant. Your settled land secured, you claim, by law and right of conquest, even God's decree, his deed and ordination for a chosen people blessed, the land your surest hedge against the boom and bust of market, your defense, the something you can bank on, plotted, measured, and fenced. But here amid the drift of stars we stand, the great galactic spill of milk that wraps us round, the rotational whirl and wheel of the scales, Aquarius, the Archer, the Bears, and armed Orion, riding the outward primal hurl from an exploded center. This infirm home, our Earth, this watery turning globe diurnal, disturbing seas in its axial revolutions. Nothing is still in the lull of this summer quiet night. A creak and growl in the glacial crawl of the polar cap. An upward grind in the weight of Annapurna. Groan and heave in the Chilean Andes, whistling loud and tumultuous winds. molten rock that boils through fissures upward, tremors in the Andreas and Humboldt faults, a sure and drifting continental drift. Remembering that we laid on our back out at the Camp Augustine and watched the stars, maybe that's a good follow-up to the astronomy lesson we had out there. Here's a poem called On Handling a Braille Bible. One time as a kind of experiment, a group of us passed around a piece of Braille writing. And this poem had its beginning in that experience of, with my eyes shut, blindfolded, running my hands over a piece of Braille writing. What pleasures I have missed by reading only with my eyes, without my fingers, as the blind, who skim with their sensitive tips these pin-pricked heavy pages along these rows of perforations, whose stipples dumbly stroke my calloused nerves, too numb, too ignorant to hear the voices of these treasured sages silenced by my nerveless fingers, master spirits speaking to the blind, who train their fingertips to hear the aged wisdom of this holy book. I close my eyes and trace a line across a page. Like eyes, do fingers move from left to right, from top to bottom on the page? From A to Z, all letters feel the same, a pleasant velvet tickle. I brush my palm across a dozen lines at once, lightly on the rounded heel, and titillate 1,000 ends of nerves and tactile feel what I have missed with eyes, how word and flesh are one in the tender fingers of the listening, knowing blind. This is a poem often when I sit down at especially if I have an assignment I have to do and have to write something, I very often feel the way this poem talks. It's called Inarticulate. In and among the fine pieces, the particles that split and cling, that I move with probe and the edge of dissecting knife, configurations come like patterns of sun and shadow through blown leafy branches on perhaps a windy day when everything's in motion. Like the refraction of a stone through water when I stand aslant and the water's roiled and full of movement. I try to find the missing phrase, the lost word, and try again to find out what it was and how it came and went, what it was I finally couldn't say. This one's called Bible Class at Breakfast. O Lord, within thy kingdom came unobserved among us, when and where we never had expected. It left us sitting bald and gray, with shoulders hunched at table, wordless, mumbling donuts with sugar glaze, a crumb is sticking to a chin, masticating wads of doughy rolls between our artificial teeth. We sip our coffee cold from styrofoam to wash the mush, to rinse it down the gorge, to sluice its fall inside into the hungry stomach. This is all we need to break our fast, to feed our morning hunger. This one is really a Christmas poem, and it's a little early for Christmas, but I'll read it anyway. And it's called One True Word. Speak, anyone who can, one true word, eloquent, sublime, embellished, or whispered plain, or shouted loud. Say out something finely true, unequivocally clear, transparent as pure water, so the light comes brilliant through. Pierce our lying, calloused ears. Use crashing, brassy cymbals if you must, snarling trumpets, drums, and snare, whole symphonies, or a cappella choirs, or thunder through organ pipes to startle our attention to hear. Or write to us in silence from a page, magazine, or book, illuminated vellum or chapbook's yellow pulp. Convince, persuade, assure us once that through the waves of sight and sound that we have seen or heard the truth in voices spoken from the dark beyond or from an inner light, and we will see, hear, We will embrace, believe one uttered truth unchanging, more rare, more dear than love on this hurling planet rushing into space, though but an infant sleeping in a manger under warped and twisted beams which bear a roof of clay in a rainless land. Say it clear, and we will fall upon our knees and gaze. I think probably I have time for about one more. And it's the title poem from this collection, which is called Uttering the Word. And the poem goes something like this. A synapse in the tentacles of the nerves, an electrical connection in the mind's storage of word and phrase that happens in the flesh. I feel a tickle in the throat, a feathering of the tongue which wrenches at its roots and utters forth between my gagging teeth, a forward lurch, a perch of claws upon my lip. Thrusting outward, its thrashing wings buffet my face, stinging, stunning, as I reel backward, awed and trembling, to give it launch. It flies, it soars, it wheels in sunlight and drops upon your shoulder, its perfect wings settling, a perfect dove, nodding its head from its perfect perch, and warbles, and everyone is pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Would you welcome, please, Daryl Lloyd.
Get somebody that writes a little fiction sandwiched in between these two fine poets, and there's always a danger in that. You think you should write a little poetry yourself. It takes a lot of gall for me to read poetry with Dwight on one side and Bill on the other, but what the heck. May as well try a bit of that. But first, I'll read the choice item. This is a piece of prose written by Andy Robison. Is Andy here tonight by any chance? Simply called The Ant. Andy's got a future, I think. I was watching an ant making his way through the leaves. What was a small area to me was like a kingdom to him. He looked lost and lonely. He wasn't sure which way to go, but then he started to dig a hole and he was gone. I like the fall of that. Nice job, Andy. I read poetry to warm up to read prose is my problem here. And I write poetry. Well, I once wrote a couplet, and it applies to my poetry. I was going to give it to students who were going to volunteer their poetry to give to me, you know, and sometimes it was very good poetry, and sometimes it wasn't very good. And I was going to have a little card made up that said, easy verse, poet's curse, keeps the worse from seeming worse. And if it helps you, that's fine, but don't show it to me. But I really didn't mean that. I never was quite that cruel. But I would say that about my poetry, too. Easy verse, poet's curse. But just say a word or two about a couple of these poems. This is one I've had around a long, long time. And when I was teaching way back in Hastings High School, I had the book, The Iliad, on the desk. In fact, I was teaching the Iliad in a world literature course at the time. And I found a strand of blonde hair in the Iliad, and I couldn't figure out how in the world it got there. And it obviously wasn't my hair, and it obviously wasn't a boy's hair. It was a girl's hair, a very nice strand of blonde hair, and found right in the middle of the Iliad. And so somehow that connected up with something I was reading in the Iliad. There is a scene in the Iliad where a bunch of the old elders are grumbling about on the walls of Troy that they're so old and they can't fight anymore, and all the young men get to go out there and do all the battling, and that witch Helen that caused all of this, things of that sort, they're grumbling about her. And pretty soon they turn around and Helen just happens by, and they don't grumble anymore. and they understand that it's all worthwhile. And so tying up that scene in the Iliad with that finding of a single strand. A single strand of your blonde hair found in a book of war, not love, became through my caressing a timeline to understanding why those old men grumbling on the vasty walls of Troy fell silent when Helen happened by. In almost every family, there is a problem somewhere. And within our family, it was a problem. I mean, I'll say extended family. But there's always moments of despair, and there's always moments of hope connected with those problems. And this particular poem had to do with traveling to a place where we hope to get some help for this family member, and the way it is going to that place, the way it would be coming back if indeed the help was there. So I wrote this a couple of years ago. On the way out, a two-lane blacktop proscribing and proscribed by steel dark clouds, windshield wipers, closed tight windows, cigarette smoke, huddling cattle, washy green pastures, posts and fences, tightening order. On the way in, a long lane's path revealing and revealed by blue expanse, unspoiled vision, the odor of earth, an itinerant herd, emerald landscape, open gates, limitless love. Cymbals roar out and in on such days as these. Therefore we accept them to mean, though you and I know they mean only as we want them to mean and do only what we want them to do. This is for Jane Rodas about librarians. This was the librarian at the North Platte Public Library when I was growing up, and I was about your age, 7th and 8th graders. And it's dedicated to that librarian. I want to thank you for protecting me from all the dangers inherent in the adult book section of North Platte's library. For without your help and thoughtful guidance, I would have surely corrupted my mind with E. Hemingway and other such dirt. But you steered me right by leading me down to the children's room for books with big print and pictures of Oz, Holland, and the farm. So, thank you again for all of your aid in keeping my thoughts innocent and clean of killing and sex and stuff of that sort. And I wrote a shorter version of that same thing. I wish now to thank you for protecting me from the infectious diseases of all those books with the adult looks in the North Platte Public Library. I felt guilty one time about when I was a senior in high school, when I gave a book report based on a movie I had seen the night before. It was the third remake of Beau Geste, as a matter of fact. And I did it to a teacher I admired a great deal. And this is a poem to Miss Shavlik, that teacher of senior English. On that day when you trapped me with your look for the way I subbed the movie for the book in senior British Lit at North Platte High, you trained me in chagrin and remorse, of course. Though it was only Percival Wren, an author less than significant, and Beau Geste is not Lord Jim, I felt guilty about letting you down and causing you to frown over my indifference to your taste. And we read a lot about energy. And so this was directed to a friend of mine who was really uptight about energy and lots of other things. Often, nights in Nebraska are cold or warm, and juice to heat or cool is costly, but don't fully insulate yourself and yours against the dark. Leave a chink or crack or some flaw in that newly built, tightly built home of yours. Let bits of nature and impulse through, a chill breeze, the noise of storm or bird, and the hot wind, to trouble prosy family comfort and bring a passionate poetry in. Now let me read you a story. I'll get to something It's a story that I know it's Dr. Harwick here, and he's heard this so many times, but it is a story I think that applies to a little bit more to junior high. It was a story I wrote for my kids because I wanted them to realize the difference between my growing up in North Platte and their growing up in Hastings. And there was a distinct difference. In many ways, we were medieval then. And this is a story called A Summer When the Signs Came Out. And I'll just read it. Mom always complained about that mirror, the one on top of the gift from Grandma's solid oak dresser in my bedroom in North Platte. The one pockmarked by marbles hit by Jim and me when we homered during our Friday night off-season baseball game on the diamond of my bed. The one which spotted your face when you stared into it. The one that later reminded me of Jim until it was sold at auction when my parents moved to southwestern Minnesota in the early 50s. I was glad to see it go. Time to hit the hay, Tigers, was my dad's usual warning of the approaching curfew, an indication that we were down to the final inning, that the folks had grown weary of marbles smashing wall and mirror, of the thuds and pings resounding from the mighty blast soaring over the iron back fence of my bedstead to the outer reaches of my room. But we tried to stretch it out to finish the game. Whoever was up, Jim or I, would attempt to squeeze in our time at bat before curfew truly tolled. I told you two to get to bed, now damn it, do it. Well, the tone of the voice would do it. Soldiers and sailors, wooden souvenir pencil bat and marbles away, bedward we plodded our disgruntled and still unweary way, the last silvering of that mirror for that day. Well, I want to describe the contest in more detail, though it was quite simple and only one of several that Jim and I got up when he stayed all night with me on those Fridays in North Platte. Let me warn you that I do not see game as metaphor here for a life as game we've heard a little too much lately. Rather, if anything, the bed baseball typified the relationship that had developed between Jim and me, intimates who, at the self-conscious age of 11, were willing to reveal to each other that toy soldiers, marble baseballs, and pencil bats still entertained us. We never knew how many innings we'd get in before curfew or before those abundant pings and thuds called down the wrath of my dad. According to who was afield, we each would position our 9 toy soldiers, plasticized for it was big wartime, on the bed so that they guarded areas corresponding to those in the baseball diamond. Whoever was at bat would hold his designated hitter and the pencil bat in his left hand and the opponent's pitcher and marble in his right. He would then slow curve or fastball the marble toward the batter. It was all reflex, and both Jim and I became remarkably adept at slugging out even the liveliest pitches. Any ball going foul or touching one of the fielders was an out. Any escaping the players on the bed was a single. Any just over the bedstead a double. Any reaching the base of the dresser a triple. Any hitting the mirror or a wall above it a home run. Well, we managed lots of power drives, hence the pockmarked mirror and my mom's complaints. That was our favorite pastime, simple and precise, measured by rule and order, sensible and fun. We played it with no one else and shared it as we shared other intimacies. Our secret camel smoking treks to the sewer outage on the Platte River. Our fumbling investigations into the lexicon of dirty words as we rhymed out new lyrics to songs such as the Surrey with the Fringe on Top. Mutual two-dimensional opinions on students and teachers that McKinley Grade School. Favorite sports heroes and movie stars, our main sexual titillation coming from peering on at movie ads carefully scissored from the Omaha World Herald. Our hopes of becoming cartoonists and comic book illustrators after we were finished with our professional baseball careers. Our fears of the dreaded diseases such as tuberculosis, cancer, and polio, on and on. Well, we always shared one last game before we tried to calm ourselves for sleep. After curfew, we would turn my Blue Ward's airline radio on and listen to the pop songs while we discussed our experiences and fantasies derived from the departing day. Precisely at midnight, Ted Bronner, the announcer, would wrap up an in-broadcasting for KODY with a recording of the Star-Spangled Banner. For us, it became absolutely mandatory that the chosen one for the night, Jim or I, would shut off the radio before we heard the first words of the anthem. If he failed his task, he was thereby forecasting bad luck for his comrade. I missed by a fraction on the last early summer Friday night that Jim stayed with me. You rat, you wanted to do that, you want me to have bad luck. He put the song on before he quit talking. No, he didn't. He did too, damn it. It's my turn next time, and I'm going to get you. Go ahead. You can go to hell. It's a stupid game anyhow. Well, after grumbling some more and wrestling a few minutes, we settled and talked ourselves to slumber and forgot it all. That was the last night Jim slept with me early in the summer of a crucial year in the mid-40s. Those early summers, June into July, were good times in North Platte. Bed baseball was out, reel was in. The water in Wiesner's sandpit pool gradually warmed to swimming temperature. Garish carnivals made their annual visits to the vacant lots by the railroad tracks. The Paramount, Fox, and State theaters offered matinees designed for kids, island-hopping war stories, horse operas, and Abbott and Costello. Smells from the Project Bakery, the Sunshine Dairy, the Public Market, and the Davis Potato Chip Factory were pungent in our world, held close to ground by the heavier air. Out-of-state cars moved bumper to bumper at the corner of 4th and Jefferson Highway 30 as latter-day pilgrims to the shrine of the Rocky Mountains westered their accustomed way. Jim and I wandered in this exciting land, always on a venture, always waiting to be surprised by the joy of what the day's visits to the UP Depot, the Burlington and Greyhound stations, Hawes Billiards, Front Street, Cody Park, whatever might bring. Boys of wintry games had become daring explorers of summer. It was all experience, lovely and exhilarating, redolent with stuff for our awaiting senses. What's on for today? Anything. It didn't matter what. We were open and ready for it all, and the world tumbled in to greet us. Fantasies of fall, winter, and spring, harbingers only, turned into fulfilled desires in early summer, and we became Renaissance children yearning for discovery. But pockets of medievalism survive into a Renaissance. Out of promise and even fulfillment comes denial. And not long after the games and the parades and the picnics and the carnivals and the patriotic speeches and the happy crowds and the fireworks of the 4th of July, North Platte became a walled town once more. The pool closed, the movie houses shut down, group activities stopped. People of means enough escaped the closing gates and joined the caravan moving west to the rarefied and cleaner air of the magic mountains of Colorado and Wyoming. Those of us required to stay within began a process of medievalization, erecting our own walls within the greater walls of our town. We lived in a plagued miniature Florence of the plains when the signs came out. Well, the quarantine signs seemed innocuous enough, black on white, rather like announcements of houses for sale. Innocuous, that is, until you really read them, until you saw what they proclaimed. Poliomyelitis. Defined, an acute infectious virus disease occurring especially in children, and characterized by inflammation of the gray matter of the spinal cord, followed by paralysis and atrophy of various muscle groups, also called infantile paralysis. The symbolism then became too clear. Images of 1 or 2 empty seats in your classroom every fall. Pictures of friends with iron supports on their legs. President Roosevelt swimming at Warm Springs. A crippled child on a March of Dimes poster. A dreadful image. Nightmarish, metamorphosing the common headache, back pains, and sore throats into Boschian visions of brace, iron lung, and grotesque little coffin. Epidemics of the mind magnified the actual cases of the disease manyfold. And and we envisioned the signs everywhere, on the comic books we read, on the strangers we brushed against, on pews in churches, on the faces of our friends. The smells of asafoetida bags replaced the smells of fresh produce. Every sweet odor turned ether to our nostrils. We learned to hate our senses as we had loved them in early summer, for the lovely, enticing things and experiences had become tainted and rotting and putrid. Only with Mom, Dad, and Jim did I feel normal and relatively free of the burden of fear. Of necessity, Jim and I remained pretty much isolated in our friendship and played games in the safe places in our backyards or in the few empty lots near our homes, away from the large groups of kids, out in the air, as we called it. It's funny to think how open spaces suggested some kind of purity to us then. Where we had sought the crowded places before, we now look for vacancy, where air, though humid, might at least hint at moving and cleansing. Even Jim, however, was barred from my bedroom sanctuary. If one had to be inside, he had to be there alone. Sacred was the citadel, and I was left to myself and to solitary games of baseball and to the radio and the pockmarked mirror, a mirror that returned my face distorted and deformed, suggestive of disease and age. We watched the signs come out in our section of town, fearful of what went on behind the marked doors, yet thankful that we remained immune and untouched. That makes 10 in our part of town, my dad told us one evening over supper. How severe are the cases, Mom asked. Someone told me yesterday they've been fairly mild. I don't know, too early to tell, I guess. You hear all kinds of rumors downtown. The paper isn't saying much. I just don't know. But I think it's time to send Larry down to Dad's farm for a week or two. No use pushing our luck, don't you think so? Mom thought so, too. And the next day I was south 40 miles from North Platte, down in the supposed safety of my granddad's farm near Wellfleet with its rural vacancy galore, and my fears frightened off by the immensity of the country and the sky. The week or two stretched into a month, as I luxuriated in my freedom of space and forgot the walled town, except when I heard the statistics on the radio or from my parents on Sundays when they drove down to see me. One August Sunday, Dad told my grandparents and me that they had estimated 200 and more cases in North Platte. But the doctors say it's tapering off, he said. A few new ones last week, but not so many as a week before. I think the worst is over. Have any of my friends got it, I asked him. Bob Merriman, but his uncle says it isn't a severe case. Anybody else? Brian Carey. They took him to Omaha yesterday. I haven't heard how he is. Brian. He's in my grade at McKinley. I didn't think he'd ever catch it. How's Jim getting along? I haven't got a letter from him this week. Hesitantly, my mom said, Larry. Her halting manner of speaking was enough. She didn't have to go on. I didn't want her to tell me, though I knew she'd have to, and I'd have to listen. And I knew I had to ask, rather to plead, the next question. It's not very bad, is it? He'll get over it. Mom never could euphemize. She hurried out the words. He's in Omaha, and they put him in an iron lung, and they don't know whether he's going to live. Damn it, oh, damn it, I never saw Jim after they took him to Omaha. I was still on the farm when his funeral was held. By the time my parents came to take me home, the epidemic had abated and school was set to open the next week. The last week of September, only 3 weeks late. A cautious order was reestablishing itself in North Platte. People interested themselves in American victories at war. The movie houses reopened. Things seemed manageable once more. We pulled down the interior and exterior walls and thought with hope about the future. Almost all those stricken had survived either whole with or only the laming of an arm or leg. For the crippled, it could always have been worse. Everybody who knew about my friendship with Jim sympathized with me. My folks, other friends, even Jim's mom and dad. Mrs. Holmes told me, we miss him terribly, Larry, and we realize you do too. If only one of us could have died instead of him. He was such a good boy. We know you feel the same way because you loved him the way we did. I didn't feel that way, though. True enough, Jim was my best friend, and I loved him, and I missed him. But finally, if one of us had to die, I guess I was glad it was Jim. I would never have another friend like him. I could never again have such a friend. Still, he was dead, I was alive, saddened and changed utterly, yet alive. Alone that fall, I added pockmarks to the mirror, and I continued to play the radio game, most of the time beating the anthem, a few times not. The pings and thuds seemed to give comfort to Mom and Dad now. At least they didn't show the old-time irritation even late at night. But I was growing into the world, and the silly games no longer really entertained me. One evening, I played my final bedroom ball game against Jim's former 9. I won easily, battering hell out of that mirror. When I quit, I threw the soldiers into my wastebasket. My mom later rescued them and stored them away, and walked over to front the dresser mirror. There were no clear areas left. My face was blotched and silver-scarred and ugly. I moved away from the dresser, shut off the light, got into bed, and turned on the radio. I let the damn thing static itself through the whole night. Well, that's about a 7th grader in North Platte in the 1940s or thereabouts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daryl. Bill? Bill Kloefkorn.
Well, first I'd like to thank and congratulate Will Locke and Hastings, Will Locke in particular and Hastings in general for having writing be a part of the outdoor program. I'm partial to writing and to writers, so it was a special privilege for me to have been invited to be a part of that outdoor education program. The chief entertainment at home, Daryl, when I was growing up in the autumn, was that of kicking leaves. That was a high point. This was a small town in south central Kansas. But you had to wait a whole year, every year, to enjoy it. So this poem is called Kicking Leaves. As a matter of fact, I still like to kick leaves. How many of you like to kick leaves? Good. I'm in good company. Kicking leaves. All day I have been walking and kicking leaves, not paying any attention to time or direction, so that when the sun becomes an orange wafer at the edge of my left shoulder and I cross over the line into that other land, I have to smile. The leaves there as if the leaves from home, embarrassed, brisk, compatible. And I turn to watch you kicking leaves behind me, you crossing over without touching the line, you kicking the same leaves I kicked. You behind me, kicking and catching up, kicking so many of those lovely leaves I can't get enough of. You behind me. A couple of seasonal poems. This one's called, well, I guess Kicking Leaves is seasonal. October. I'm a day late on this, but you all remember October. Above the linden, a full moon rises, impatient to join in. A composting of yellow leaves sweetens the front lawn. Where were you when I needed someone to grow old with? Tonight, the movie is a rerun of Sumac, its blue blood thinning. No use trying to rub the salt from the popcorn from your choke cherry lips. It's there, thank the stars, for the duration. Now frost on all the windows is denying the envious eyes of the riffraff. Sure, you may sit as close as you like. Before the month is out, I'll say it. I love you so much, it's scary. So, you mind if I call you Pumpkin? That's a little love poem. I'll try to identify the love poems so you don't get worked up on the wrong poem. I've been writing a lot of love poems lately. I don't know what's the matter. I think I've almost come to the conclusion that almost every poem we write is in some way or another a kind of love poem. This one I wrote last fall when I mowed the lawn for the last time that season. So there's a certain ominous quality about the title It's called Mowing the Lawn for the Last Time. But I'd let the grass grow fairly tall, and I don't know if you remember last fall and last winter. It's okay if you don't. In fact, I sort of envy you. But the grass was fairly tall, and the leaves then had fallen on the grass, and there was a real heavy frost fairly early. And my wife says, "When are you going to mow that lawn?" I've euphemized her question. And I thought about it, and finally I decided I'll mow it today if it kills me. And I got out the mower and I put the catcher on it. And as thick as the grass was and the leaves, the catcher filled up about every 18 inches. Which means it took me all day to mow the lawn. But there were rewards. It was a nice day, and the swaths were so clean. You could see so precisely where you had gone. There was no question about it. And under all that was grass, greener than during the month of June. So there was that reward. And then my wife came out with coffee, and that's in the poem. It's called Mowing the Lawn for the Last Time. I do it shortly after sunrise, after the first hard freeze, each swath a shredding of leaf and of blade and of frost. Each swath so green, so perfect, I pause time and again to look down the road, to inhale as well as to see it, to take it all in. And the sound of the mower, a red piper cub against a blue sky, circling, which is why I do not hear my wife at first when she calls me. We sit on elm stumps drinking black coffee from thick white porcelain cups left from the days of her dead father's cafe. I remember the waitress whose face, it was said, could sour milk. How the regular customers loved her. We hold the cups with both hands, leaning our faces into them. The morning, for a few moments with us, stands still. We are very happy. It's kind of nice having a hot cup of black coffee with the first woman you ever married, practically, having one with you. Trading comic books. The major literary influence in my life was the comic book. There were others. There was a King James translation, which was and is an ongoing influence, especially for the style, I think. But the comic book was really quite important. The Sears catalog was very important also. And another influence came in. You could read that indoors or out. It was, a versatile literary influence. My mother bought, when I was about a junior, she bought a copy of the Lincoln Library of Essential Information from a traveling salesman. So that was another influence, but it came along kind of late. I mean, if you don't know it by the time you're a junior in high school, I think you're over the hill. I used to marvel at that book, though. The Lincoln that's the name of it. It's still in the library, isn't it? Is it still being published? It is. The Lincoln Library of Essential Information, which means that if it isn't in that book, it's not essential. Mm-hmm. But and at first I believed that, and then I began to look up things that weren't in there. And I thought, well, if they're not in there, they're not essential. But then I looked up some things that I knew were essential, and they weren't in there. And I began to distrust that source. I looked up the name, for example, the on-the-street name of Batman and Robin, and neither name was in there. So I became disillusioned with that source and went back to comic books and the Sears catalog. There was a rich kid in town, there always is one, and you can cope with him. Bob Schmidt was the rich kid in our town. He was a very fat kid, and we were very clever. We called him Tub. And he was able to buy new comic books whenever he wanted them because he had the money. And he liked, above all the comic books, he liked Wonder Woman. So once in a while, I or my brother John would get a copy of Wonder Woman and hold on to it until Tub would come through with 4 or 5 comic books. He'd give us 4 or 5 comic books for that one Wonder Woman. And in that way, we built up our supply of comic books. There were other ways, but that was one of them. Now, this poem's called Trading Comic Books. Tub Schmidt is a tub because he eats too much, and he eats too much because he has too much to eat, and he has too much to eat because he has too much money, yet he believes that someone as beautiful as Wonder Woman might one day jump right off the page and pay him some attention. So when we trade comic books, I save my Wonder Woman until the last, until Tub Schmidt begins to plead, then drool, which means that for one Wonder Woman, I can expect to receive a Submariner, a Torch and a Toro, a Batman and a Robin, a Captain Marvel and a Superman, plus all of Tub's loose change. And just because he honestly believes that someone as lovely and as trim as Wonder Woman could care for such a slob who has acne too, like him. He was actually, Tub was actually a very good friend. I want to finish with 3 or 4 poems that relate to the river. The first poems I read were outdoor poems, and the out of doors for me is a big influence on my writing. I think it's Don Welch at Kearney State who, when his students tell him that they're in some kind of a dry spell with their writing, tells them to go take a hike. And I think that's very good advice, because often there's something very invigorating about the out of doors, regardless of the weather. Nebraska has weather, not climate. So you may go out and be swept away in a flood one day and be swept away in a drought the next. But that's part of the charm of it, it seems to me. It's very difficult to stay outside and be active for very long without becoming invigorated. And certainly that experience on the Platte River at Camp Augustine is a good example, it seems to me. This is a poem that I wrote while I was living near the Platte River in a little cabin when I was on a sabbatical leave from Wesleyan 3 years ago. Wesleyan had inaugurated a sabbatical leave program that it still has. We thank God almost daily for that. We ask him to pass time more quickly so that another sabbatical will come up more quickly. But while God answers one prayer, he ignores another. I guess 1 out of 2 ain't bad. Anyway, it was a mild winter, and in March, my granddaughter, who at the time was about 3 years old, came out to see me. She spent the whole day with me, and we tromped the boondocks, the bluffs. This is a cabin between Lincoln and Omaha, and spent a good deal of our time throwing rocks into the river. That was what she thought was the most fun. On our way home, on our way back to Lincoln that night, this was a Friday. I went home on weekends and stayed out there during the week. It was kind of nice. You had the best of 2 worlds, a party every weekend, suffering during the week. We got about halfway back to Lincoln, and Michelle looked at me and said, "Could we go back there tomorrow and find all those rocks that we threw into the river?" So in this poem we do, though we didn't. Catherine spends most of the morning washing 7 small stones, which in the afternoon she throws into the river. That evening she wants to know if they are still there, if in the morning we might be able to find them. We wade to each precise spot where she knows, she remembers, she threw them. The water, I tell her, has moved them downstream, and she begins to walk in the direction I am pointing. I follow. She stops from time to time to bend over to bring up a rock, a leaf, a twig, a grain of sand, until at last her fists are thick with 7 small stones. We take them home and dry them off, feed them, give them names, show them to all our friends. When they are fully grown, we carry them back to the ongoing lotus of the river, where, one by one, in mutual joy and pain, we throw them in. Well, it's one advantage to having a granddaughter. There are other advantages. There are also other granddaughters. My granddaughter is unique in this world of granddaughters. She is bright, and she's very beautiful. I have observed a number of other people's grandchildren. I find them to be ordinary to ugly, and dull to downright stupid. So I'm thankful for Michelle in many ways. I'll conclude with some Camp Augustine poems. This one was written by one of my students out there, Lisa Yeda. Is Lisa here? Where's Lisa? There she is. And let's see, it's untitled, as I have it here. It's in 3 short parts. Part 1. Let the motion drive you dizzy. Sit, swing on the tree of your choice. It's all yours, mine, ours. 2. Float on down the river. Float on. Dreams carry well over water. Float on down the river. 3. The natives sat, they sang, they lived, they died in their practical and spiritual world. They knew what they were doing. We had talked about the teepee, especially, how the Indian often brought to his religion a sense of practicality, so that the architecture of the teepee had something to do with the religion, the circle, and so on. And the poet whom I just read didn't miss anything. Wasn't it Henry James who said that the writer should be that person on whom nothing is lost? Is that right? Must have been, yeah. I always turn to a chairman. You know, when in doubt, turn to a chairman, and if he doesn't know, at least you get the satisfaction of him embarrassing him. But Daryl has the right answer. It must have been. That's great. These poems are the ones that I wrote with my students out at Camp Augustine. We took 4 hikes through the walk-through time, and at the end of each hike, having taken notes, having looked around us and smelled things and touched things and listened to things, we sat on stumps and wrote something, for better or for worse. My theory of poetry is that 'tis better to have nibbled and lost than never to have nibbled at all. Walking the near bank of the Platte River. This trail leads us beside the dark flowing water into the deep, well-kept secret of the cottonwood, beyond the sprawled inertia of the prairie schooner, toward the wide, high rise of the blue heron. And the silence within the teepee on Indian Island takes us another step further, beyond the world of hustle and of nerve ends and of bother and of undetermined fuss. Where this trail leads is not to a dead and ancient end, but to wherever we permit the workings of an open mind to take us. For me, one of the lessons of Camp Augustine is precisely that. You walk those trails and you think about those who had walked them before us, at the same time that you retain enough of your own individuality to shape your own trails. Dale Clark came out and did us an interesting lecture, wasn't it, talk, about traders. Remember the fur traders? So this poem is for him. It's called Trading. This fur for those bright beads, this skin for that exquisite linen. And the sun rises, and the sun goes down. This pelt for that swift steel, this lap robe for that ornamental coin. And the river rises, and the river goes down. This sinew for that sweet tobacco, this hide for that occult reflection. And the hope rises, and the hope goes down. This eye for that eye, tooth for tooth. This pipe for that blue-barreled weapon. I will read two more, the other two that I wrote out there. Our leader, Will Locke, on the last day, near the end of the session, told us, this was in addition to the experience this year. We didn't do this last year, I don't think. Told us that we had 40 minutes or so that we must spend by ourselves. Did you do that with each group? And you all remember how you had that quiet time? And it was called solo, where you went out and found yourself a small chunk of acreage, and you sat down with nobody around you, and for a while did nothing but think. And I enjoyed that very much, except that my mind began to wander. And I thought of my wife. I still like her. So I owe this poem, I guess, somewhat to Will, who enforced that solo experience rather vigorously. Camp Augustine, late September. Our leader says solo, and we know good and well he means it. Find a place near the river where you can spend the next 45 minutes with yourself and yourself only. So, sweetheart, there you have it. You can't come along. Our leader said solo, and we both know he means it. On an abundance of blue stem, I lie counting each spot where the sun strikes the water. By the time I reach 17, the brilliance has done its wonderful work on my need for caring. I don't care what our leader says. I am thinking of you. I rise from the blue stem, with bare feet flatten the area southward, my body here, your body there, just so on a pallet for two. And I'll close with these impressions from Camp Augustine. The poem is called A Walk Through Time, Impressions, a series of a dozen very short experiences or impressions as we walk through the path, or we walk the path that we called A Walk Through Time. 1. Morning sun strikes the water and, having struck, moves on to enlighten the shag bark on the cottonwood. 2. A small chuckle in the throat of the North Platte River. Is the joke on me? 3. A nameless tree stands indecisive in the bright sun. Heads green, tails crimson, she loves me not. Her hair is the color of my blush. 4. Along the path beside the river, sudden stumps rise to keep our footsteps honest. 5. Inside the teepee on Indian Island, I sit as part of a circle of 15. All wars for the moment have ceased. I think of the soft, moist nose of a painted pony. The word for the rest of the day is peace. 6. How fine is the sand on the path between the river and Donut Island? The word for the rest of the day is sugar. 7. At the chapel we worship what we worship, that the sun burns alive and well just over there, that thus far we are not irreparably lost. 8. Some directions for determining the harmfulness of the snake. 1. If the snake bites you and you die, the snake was probably poisonous. 2. If the snake bites you and you do not die, The snake was either not poisonous or was poisonous and the poison did not work. 3, if the snake bites you and the snake dies, you too have problems. 9, Mr. Block calls a young tree a green ash. I call it a young student filled with envy, wanting to transfer roots to Hastings Junior High. 10, how wide is a cottonwood? It's as wide as a grandparent's dream. It leans its huge ear down toward the water, as if to hear the secret of a moving river. 11, the teeth on the buzzsaw are grinning like a rusty gopher. When I strike the blade with a length of cottonwood, the sound is that small, high shot heard round our small, splendid world. 12, the word for the rest of the day is live. Thank you all.
Just a little break here, but there are two more important parts of the program. One is we thought it would be very interesting to hear some questions. And so we've asked the people to come up here a minute and field some questions. As they come up here, let's give them another, all three of the writers and readers, a round of applause for the excellent job. You can slide that back and forth here. Okay, we'd like to have some questions now. Yes, Christy?
What was it? Well,
Okay, I think it'd be best if I to just repeat the questions. Christy asks, and I think I've heard this question somewhere before, what are good topics to write about?
Well, is that all right? Can you hear okay? I don't like to exclude any subject. I'll write about anything. I have no shame. And I really am serious about that. For me, I feel that I feel you should write about something that at times might not be very happy. I mean, you should feel free to write about things that are sad as well as about things that are happy. But one thing I like to do is write about things that seem little to other people until you write about them. I like to try to make small things, apparently small things, meaningful. You know, that comic books really were an important part of my life. They still are. I don't read comic books much. I read Mad Magazine, but and the Omaha World Herald, which is pretty much the same. But really, those things influence you, and you know, you can write poems about just anything you want to. It's not what you write about, I think, that's so important. It's how you write about it.
I guess I'll usually write about something that I see a connection to something else. That is, very often and that can be anything. And normally I like to start it from little dramatic scenes, or just some strong image hit my eye and I remember it and I feel strongly about it and I can see a connection with that and something else. And that can be between anything. And any subject's open to write about. Some subjects are not open to read in public about, however. I have lots of poems I wouldn't dare read in public because they're about things that are too private, too personal, something of that sort. But normally it has to strike me with a connection that I feel deeply about, I suppose.
Whatever you know about. Whatever you know about.
Sean? Okay, the question is, why write poetry? What's the point of writing in poetic form?
Sometimes it's to get rid of things. That is, sometimes it's to define them and get rid of them. That is, here's an experience and it's a shaggy thing. and you got to trim the edges of it off and make it fit a pattern, and then I know what it means. And often I don't know what it means till I trim it off by writing about it and putting it into words. Finally, the way I know things and the way I think about everything is always that little stream of language running through my head. The only way I'm conscious of things are little lines of words running through my head. If I can bring something to consciousness, then it's in words. And so sometimes it's just a matter of defining what that little line of discourse that our internal life, and getting it to hold still for a minute so I can come back to it and know it later. Because as those words run through my head, they're gone. And sometimes, have you ever tried to, you get an idea and then you try to restate the sentence that you said before and you can't get it right again? One of the reasons for writing is that you can hold that little stream of discourse that's your own internal monologue. You can hold it still on the page, and there it is, and you can come back to it.
Yeah, I like that notion of holding it, because some things I have much difficulty remembering. And with words sometimes on the page, I can remember them. I mean, I can hold them so that when I read the poem back, then the experience will come back to me more fully. For example, about a year ago, my daughter came over all rosy and beaming and just grinning from ear to ear. She and her husband, they had a bottle of champagne, and I said, "What's the event?" And Terry says, "I'm going to have a baby." And we drank the champagne, and that night, before I went to sleep, some lines came into my head that reminded me of the experience. And the lines were, "My daughter pregnant tells me, when I hug her, I cannot hug her enough." And I got up and wrote down those lines and then finished the poem. And I really believe that having the poem on the page helps me remember and re-experience those moments when Terry and her husband came over so happy that they were going to have a baby. You say, "Well, I'll always remember that." But you don't always, or parts of it slip away, and the words help you keep it. You can't always keep all of it, but the words can help you keep at least a part of it. The baby was a girl. Yeah. Now 2.5 months old, weighed about 7 pounds, 4.5 ounces approximately. Kylie Ann, she's doing really fine. And I look forward to showing her, you know. But someday I hope I give it to her, you know. I want to give her that poem, and so she'll know how I felt about her being born, you know. That's one way of telling you, that's just another way of telling your daughter, your granddaughter, how much you love them. That's a very important way, I think.
What am I doing up here with these two old grandfathers on either side of me? I'm not one.
No, go ahead.
I'm looking at the clock, and I don't want the young people to get so tired that they don't have the energy to go into the library and sit around and get to read some of their own. So let's take one more question from anyone, and then we'll go on to the next part here. Okay. Brent? Oh, how do you pick the right words? Okay. How do you find the right words? I like that question.
I don't know what you ever do. I'm not talking about poetry now. I'll talk about writing a short story and things of that sort. I'm never happy with them. When I was reading this story tonight, again, I've read it too many times. There are lots of things I would change about it. And I never feel quite right with it. And I think maybe as long as I don't feel quite right, I'll come closer to getting the right words than if I think I'm absolutely right. Because I'm still straining on the things, and there's an edge there that I haven't quite got. So I'm always thinking about that very question you're asking. And it may be more important to ask that question than to have an answer to it.
I just keep trying the same phrase over and over and over with variations and variations, and that happens really very fast. You know, when I write a poem, the first draft is always almost illegible right after I get through it once, because I've gone back and tried lines over and over again and keep throwing new words around the idea over and over. And I recommend free writing, where I try to make my fingers go as fast as my head will go, and I can scarcely read my handwriting that way, but I can make it out. But it allows me to try dozens of, kind of the buckshot approach, just blast all the way around it and then pick what comes out best.
I think that's one of the best questions you can ask about writing, because most writing workshops that I'm associated with are not really creative writing workshops, they're creative editing workshops. This assumes that the writer does get something down, free written or otherwise. So you spend really most of your time trying to find that right word, that right combination of words. And I think what Dwight said about sticking with it, persistence, just stay with it, be stubborn. And also, don't settle for a word that contradicts your attitude. If you read the thing and a word there goes contrary to what you know your attitude is, then you have to change it. And you have to keep changing it until you get the word that doesn't go contrary to your attitude. That's why I think poems are reflections of individual attitudes, and getting the words in line with the attitude takes a certain amount of bullheadedness, I think, actually. Just staying with it, dogging it.
Thank you for your questions. There would be a lot more, but I think we should move on to the more informal section. But I want to tell you about something that's in the works, that's in the planning stage. And before I give you the directions as to how to go on over to the library and what there is to do there. This is in the planning stage. I'm working on a project with Bill and Mel Elaine Kreutz, who's on the Hastings College faculty. Raise your hand. Who is a specialist also in creative writing and English and Native Americans, on a summer school project that would take place at Camp Augustine, and we would walk trails but also go in vehicles all along the Platte River, the Oregon Trail, stopping at Fort Kearney, at Ash Hollow, at Scotts Bluff, at Fort Laramie, and ending up on the high slopes of Medicine Bow Peak at the snowdrift where the first melting drops begin, the North Platte River. 7 days, and it would be a very intensive history, direct experience, writing type of thing. We'll have more information for you if our plans go well in January. It would be for those who finish 7th, 8th, and 9th grade and who have kind of enjoyed the outdoor classroom approach where you sort of do everything. We would do our own cooking, we would camp, we'd do a lot of hiking, a lot of direct experience things. So that's coming up, and look for word, I would say, in January on that. And we hope that there will be some grant money so that the cost on that will be quite a bargain. Now, I think the neat part is yet to come. I think it's been terrific so far. I've really enjoyed it. But now, if young people, you can head for the library, grab a drink of water or a drink of juice, just a minute, drink of juice, and there are 3 circles. Take one of those chairs, get your poem if you had nerve enough to bring it with you. We hope you did. And the 3 writers will join one of the groups, and you can read, you can ask questions, you can discuss, you can analyze. We might go 20 minutes. That would be enough time to go through several. Adults, you can pull up a chair around and listen if there's not enough chairs, or you can look at the pictures, look at a slideshow. If I don't see you again, thank you for coming.
1.
On 1, what is that?
Mic 1. Now we're on mic 2. Testing on mic 3. This is a test on 3, on 2, on 1.